Path of Exile has been in its early access state for a few weeks now, and there's been a ton of things that have been discussed around the PoE community. I also do have my takes and personal gripes with Path of Exile as a newer player to the Path of Exile series, some things that I hope that they do fix in the future, and things that I hope resonate with the newer audience as well as players that are just getting started. And just sorcerers in general on how it affects the class overall. We got a ton to talk about. What's up world, it's Utopia back in with another video. Today we're checking out all things Path of Exile 2. First up, I want to go over my problems with PoE just in general, kind of lean into how they apply to sorceress, as well as how they apply to other games and other ARPGs that I've dealt with and done build guides for previously. Then we'll kind of mix it all together at the very end and go over my gripes with the whole situation in general. So first up, I do want to go over my first build guide, which was my ice build. Now, I was one of the first people to post this. Not that it matters, it really doesn't matter a whole ton who posted first. Great minds, as they say, think alike, making mostly jokes there, but people do post, and I was one of the first ones there. That also was the case for my Diablo 4 Blizzard build back in the day, Blizzard Spikes. Nobody was using Blizzard Spikes, and it just so happened that Lilith was defeated with a Blizzard Spike build that everybody ended up using. Now, I wasn't one of the first people to get there, so it didn't translate, but I did showcase the Blizzard Spike build as one of the first ones. Again, none of that really matters, but to showcase that I do try to innovate there, not try to go off other people's build guides. However, with the case of the Archmage in my build guide there. Now, unfortunately, I had to go over some other build guides and compare and contrast there because I wasn't up to snuff, and I had basically invested a ton into my Ice Sorceress that got nerfed into the ground with Cast on Freeze, and so I had to look to other places to try to catch myself up to speed with the Archmage, as well as even Fireball build and a few others. I did try to catch up there overall. Which comes to my first gripe there, which is that the passive tree doesn't feel as influential when you combine gearing. Gearing does significantly outweigh that. And if I go into other build guides, I will showcase those very, very quickly. Now, this is not to call anyone out. I'm not calling any other build guides out. This is just to use them in reference, as this is kind of going to be a reference video to that, as I've seen other people call other build guides and talk about them in general, and I just want to go over them overall. So this first one here, this was an Archmage build that I kind of discovered online that I did reference a lot, as he had some very good stuff here. However, I noticed that he had a lot of jewel sockets, and in his passive tree, he did chase a lot of jewels. You'll see here where you really can, and where I kind of stared away from that in a specific reason. So you'll see in the passive tree here, we do have a lot of jewel sockets that you can chase. There's one here, there's one over here, there's some over here that you can get that have some decent stuff with lightning and other things that you can grab into eventually, and there's also a few along this ridge over here as well. So there's a lot of jewel sockets that you can eventually chase into if you wanted to take this person's build seriously. However, when you do look at this build, you'll start to realize the cost of exalts to make this build even function for low tier maps. Now, when we do look at that, we'll look at some jewels here where we do see even trying to get one or two of these affixes on these jewels here will cost you one divine orb. Now, you can make some modifications there where you can actually lower these down if you do search. Now, this is a little tip here that you should always search by both exalts and divines. Now, you can get these down to about 20 exalts, and the reason why you'll want to do that is because divines will cost you quite significantly more. You'll see that right here when we go to exalts that we want divine orbs. They're up to 111 right now as of recording this video, which is absolutely insane. If we take that into account, both exalted cost and divine cost, when we use this person's build in consideration, they have 10 jewels here, meaning that this will cost you a total of 200 to over 1,100 exalted orbs as of recording this video. That is absolutely insane. Anybody starting out in low tier maps, which is exactly where they need their build to come online, is between tier 1 and tier 12. You can get through tier 1s with a pretty bad build, but once you get up to tier 10s and tier 12s, you need to have high DPS and high survivability, and the only way to do that is by having a functional build. If you try to go about that using this jewel method that this person has showcased, that will cost you a staggering amount of exalted orbs. That's insane that you will need that many. If we try to get 10 here, that's going to cost you 1,100 exalted orbs. Now, you can go the way or the other method here, which is using exalted orbs in exchange for that. However, you're not going to get anywhere close to the kind of jewels that this person has here, increased critical spell chance, you are going to have to refine this section here, these stat modifiers here, a lot in order to get this build to come online. That is one of my major gripes with a lot of builds that are posted. Another one here is when people do showcase their gear. Now, I've done build guides that have said you don't need any gear. That's why I don't have my gear on the Mobalytics links, is because I've said that you don't need any gear to make these work. You should essentially prioritize mana and energy shield, because we're eventually going to want to get one specific amulet that every single sorceress build basically uses at this point, which is the Everlasting Amulet. Now, this is my other gripe with that. This Everlasting Amulet is not cheap by any means. You'll see some of these will come down at 10. This one's probably gone. A lot of these are more than likely going to cost you 20 Exalted Orbs. When I made my first guides, those were actually quite expensive. It's actually around 50 to 60 Exalted Orbs. It has come down quite a bit. I haven't made an updated guide yet, so I more than likely would include this, as you probably could get this Everlasting Glaze Amulet quite cheap, maybe 10 to 15 Exalted. So it's not too bad right now, but this was a lot more expensive when I made my build guides. In fact, most people didn't even want to sell them for Exalted Orbs. They mostly went for Divine Orbs, which would have cost you 111. But if you could find it for Exalts, those disappeared quite quickly. Again, you can change the search there very easily. The lowest you're going to find is about 10. More than likely, even if I wish for this person, I'm more than likely not even going to get a response or an invite. That's going to be gone nearly instantly. That person probably received 10 to 20. As you see, I didn't even get a notification here to join this person's party, as that one sold out nearly instantly, or they relisted it because they realized how low they have that on there for. You're more than likely going to need 20 just for that amulet there, which is what you make. Basically, the entire build for Sorceress is dependent on like 3 skill points. That's my other gripe here, is you really don't need anything here. You don't really need any of this stuff, except maybe Energy Shield to kind of have a domino effect there. Yes, of course you do need that, and you do need mana regeneration. But dependent on your damage is more than likely really with this skill point here, this skill point here. Unless you go the Jewel method, then you won't take that one, and the Eldritch Battery, which is over right here. Those are the most dependent ones that you need. If you get those in order, your build comes online as long as you have the Everlasting Glade. Everything else, it doesn't really matter, which is my other gripe there, that it just really is dependent on this one amulet. And what do we remind that from? Barbarian over on Diablo 4. I believe it was the Twin Strikes. I might be mistaken. It might be a different unique here that warriors needed for their build to come online. Just even a build, as warriors were really bad, just like they are, or barbarians rather, were really bad with the start of Diablo 4. The reason why is they needed a specific unique in order for their build to come online, in order for it to work. And that's the same way with sorceresses. Barbarians hated that. They hated that in Diablo 4. I don't know why people are okay with that in Path of Exile 2. I get that gear should matter to an extent, but the fact that one amulet can change your entire build there is quite insane. As you see, now I built up 3,900 shield, and we built up around 2,000 mana. If we do actually want to switch over to Everlasting Glaze, we'll have around 6,000 mana, and then we'll have around 3,000 energy shield, which is enough because most of our damage is being taken from our mana, which also does translate to damage. As you can see here in our passive tree, we do have this ability here, this Arcane Intensity, which does translate mana into spell damage. Other than that, realistically, you're only looking at Magnitude of Shock, which does increase your damage there quite significantly. There are some Magnitude stuff here that will really help your damage overall as a sorceress. And if you're trying to look at for single target damage, you want Strike Twice, which will be affected by 2 shocks at once. That's also going to increase your damage quite substantially. Everything else on this board doesn't really matter overall unless you're trying to translate into Energy Shield, which yes, you will need to because you need to do the conversions back and forth. So realistically, it's Energy Shield and then those 3 skill points that I pointed out there that kind of make the entire build work. Everything else is just very minute additions to your damage. It doesn't really affect much at all. Kind of crazy how my amulet can decrease my damage so significantly. You'll see my damage 6,700. It's pretty low overall because I don't have the best gear. We take this off. I just lost over 3 or nearly 3, actually, yeah, it was over 3,000 DPS just from my one amulet. The fact that gear is that influential to your character when you're just starting on maps is a little bit too much. This was the same case with Diablo 4 and was the biggest gripe for people overall. I believe even Rax had issues with this. Rax talked about this in several videos, current state, I believe his Path of Exile videos here, where he did talk about this, overall that being an issue. People had the same problem with Diablo 4 and Warriors, and Barbarians rather, and especially the case with it being Sorceress. Even for example here, if I do apply this one, which has Spirit, we take this one, I gain a lot of DPS, but I lose a lot of shield, which is what we need to convert back into mana if we did have the Everlasting Blaze amulet. Again, in order to get those, you have to farm up exalts, which back when I was making my build guides, costed around 50 to 60 exalts, which were quite insane just to even get in the maps if you weren't already farming the one boss trick method that did get end up patched. There's just a lot of stuff there, a lot of gripes with the Sorceress class. I don't like how one amulet is the course and the surrounding to make this build work. It is just one amulet is the cause for nearly all your damage, because that's what does translate to damage, is your mana translates into energy shield, which gets converted back, or your energy shield rather gets converted into mana, and then the mana gets converted back into energy shield, allowing you to even have energy shield, which the mana will then translate into damage. I like the concept, it's very cool. I don't like that it's tied to one amulet specifically, and that's all tied to RNG. At least, I know I keep referencing Diablo 4, I'm not a big fan of Diablo 4 overall, but I don't like how it's unfortunately made it that this was RNG. Now you can actually build these uniques. Oh, they're really easy to get, especially from Grigor. You can kind of focus target these uniques and get them from specific bosses. Diablo 4, or Path of Exile rather, does not have any means of method to do that. And that is why I don't, or at least have a huge gripe with the way gearing is kind of made to suck. Especially with Sorceress. Sorceress feels like a very weak class until you get this one amulet that just triples and quadruples your damage quite significantly. And it's why my build guides have always been made with no gearing in mind, as you cannot try to get this amulet unless you use chance orbs, which are RNG on top of RNG on top of RNG to even get those. I spent like 10 to 20 chance orbs just to try to get this one amulet. So I've always made my build guides in mind of that, to just try to at least build something that will work. You can use this build with what it is in T15 maps. I've done it plenty of times here. Now I get this every video. I obviously have taken a break from Path of Exile, but where it says at my T2 maps, I purchased T15 maps. That was so I didn't have to sit there constantly doing tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 maps over and over again. I just went and bought T15 maps. I bought T14 maps. They cost 1 exalt. They were very cheap, and once I had those, I could then farm more of them up, and that's actually what I did, and that's why I did do around 10 to 15 maps, but it was in T12s and T15s, at least between there. Sometimes I was spending Regal Orbs as to make it a little bit cheaper to get additional maps there, so that way I could push maps higher and essentially farm gear and essentially farm exalts faster instead of having to go through all the maps like T2 to T1. It just was quite annoying to have to do that. I just kind of wanted to push maps quickly. But I figured I would address some things, why I feel like Path of Exile does feel a bit weird with gearing, especially Sorceress right now. Sorceress feels like a very, very weak class until you get one specific unique, and then that kind of changes your entire build overall, and it just feels like it's way too influential to the gearing process as well as the gearing guide, where essentially you're just telling people, hey, instead of my skill tree mattering at all, which it really doesn't to an extent, you're telling people that they should just target farm one specific unique for their amulet, which I do find a bit annoying. There's other big creators that do agree with this. Raxnator and a few others have talked about how gearing just matters a little bit too much in Path of Exile, so I hope they do fix that. I might take a break here from the game overall, only because it just feels like I'm chasing one specific unique, or I'm chasing a build guide that doesn't really matter aside from a few points, where even the Ascendancy tree doesn't really feel like it influences you that much aside from Arcane Surge and maybe Strike Twice. Overall, it should about cover for today's video. I hope that clarified some things with the way I do my build guides, why I don't include the gearing process over on Mobalytics, and I feel like I still optimize this build as best as I could and as most as I could overall. Hopefully that does cover everything. My gripes with Path of Exile, hopefully they do fix this class and not make it one dependent on one unique. I'd really appreciate that. If you enjoyed today's video, like and subscribe, and until the next one, deuces.